I found out that my husband faked getting laid off. He just quit his job and bought a gaming PC, sneakers, and daily takeout. So I made him feel what it was like to be someone without a job. Wes and I had been married for 6 years. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. I worked as a vet tech at an animal clinic, and Wes was a warehouse supervisor bringing in decent money. Both paychecks went into one account, bills came out first, savings second, and whatever was left we split. I never stressed about money because there was always enough. Then in March, Wes came home and told me he got laid off. Said the company was making cuts, and his whole department got let go. I didn't question it. I hugged him, told him we'd be fine, and that night I picked up extra shifts at the clinic. For the next 8 months, I covered everything. Rent, groceries, car payments, utilities, his phone bill. I stopped spending anything on myself. I hadn't gotten my hair done since February. I wore the same 3 pairs of work scrubs until 2 of them had holes in them. Wes, meanwhile, was job hunting. At least that's what he told me. He'd sleep until noon, spend the afternoon on his laptop, and tell me he'd applied to a few places. Some weeks he'd say he had a phone interview that didn't pan out. Other weeks he'd say nobody was hiring. I believed all of it. What I couldn't figure out was why we were still so short every month. Even on one income, we should have had enough to keep up with bills and eat decently. But every month I was scraping the bottom. I brought it up to Wes twice, and both times he told me we lost his income and that I needed to be more realistic about what one paycheck could cover. That made me feel foolish for even asking. Then in November, I ran into Wes's old coworker Dale at the grocery store. He asked how Wes was doing since he quit. I said, "You mean since he got laid off?" Dale looked confused and said, "No, Wes quit. He'd put in his notice back in March because he didn't want to work under the new floor manager." Everyone was caught off guard because it was a solid job with full benefits, and Wes just walked away over a scheduling disagreement. I stood there holding a cart full of discount groceries. I smiled, finished the conversation, drove home, and went straight to our bank account. What I found there had been hidden in plain sight for 8 months. A gaming PC, sneakers, headphones, a drone, a new fishing rod, over $9,000. I didn't say anything to Wes that night. I just sat with it. The next morning, I started building a plan. I told Wes the clinic had cut my hours due to budget issues and showed him a letter. My manager helped me write it. I told him we were going to have to tighten things up more than we already had. He looked at me and said maybe I could pick up a second job somewhere. I told him I was already running on empty, carrying everything alone, and that maybe it was time for him to expand his search. He went quiet after that. Within 3 days, everything started falling apart for him. He couldn't order delivery because I switched the card on file and told him I had to remove the apps to cut costs. I started buying just enough groceries for simple meals and cooking exactly 2 portions so there was nothing extra sitting in the fridge. I canceled every streaming service. I told him we needed to drop his phone to the cheapest plan available. Every comfort he had been quietly enjoying on my paycheck disappeared within a week and a half. He told me I was going overboard. I told him we didn't have a choice since neither of us was bringing in full income anymore. He couldn't push back without admitting he had money or knew where it had been going, and he couldn't do that without blowing up his own story. That Friday, his mom called to ask if we were coming to his brother's birthday dinner on Saturday. Wes said yes. At the table, his mom asked how the job hunt was going. Wes gave his usual answer about the market being rough and nothing sticking. I didn't say a word. I ate my food. Then his mom set her fork down and mentioned she'd run into Dale's wife at church earlier that week. She looked at Wes and asked him directly whether he had quit his job. His brother stopped eating. His dad leaned back and crossed his arms. Wes tried to say it was complicated. His mom asked him what was complicated about walking away from a perfectly good job and lying to his wife about it for 8 months while she worked herself into the ground covering everything. Wes looked at me like I had set him up. I hadn't. He set himself up 8 months ago when he walked out of that job and decided to let me pay for it. Wes tried to recover. He said the new floor manager made his life miserable, that I didn't understand what it was like going in there every day. He looked around the table like he was waiting for someone to nod along. Nobody did. Haley cut him off and said Dale's wife told her he left over a scheduling change. Her voice wasn't loud. It was the kind of calm that made the whole room feel smaller. Wes shifted in his seat and said it was more than that. He didn't explain what more than that meant. He said just enough to make you think there was something deeper and waited for someone to fill in the rest. But nobody was filling in anything. Dante put both hands flat on the table and said, "Then explain it. Because right now you look like a man who let his wife carry him for 8 months while he sat at home." Wes's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. Then Fionn set his napkin down and said, "Bro, please just tell me you at least told her the truth." He meant me. Wes didn't answer. Fionn pushed his chair back slightly and said, "That's messed up." 3 words. And you could tell it hit Wes harder than anything Haley or Dante had said, because Fionn wasn't someone who usually got involved. Wes fired back, "You don't know the whole story." Fionn said, "Then tell us." Right now. Nobody had left. Nobody had changed the subject. And Wes still had nothing real to offer. I stayed quiet through all of it. On purpose. For 8 months, I had been the only one pushing back on Wes. Every time I did, he made me feel like I was overreacting or ungrateful or bad with money. But right now, his family was doing something I couldn't do on my own. They were making him answer for it. He tried deflection. Half-truths. He even went for a guilt trip about how he'd been going through a difficult time and nobody thought to ask how he was doing. None of it landed. Then Haley leaned forward and looked at me. Not at Wes. At me. And she said, "How much has he spent while you were paying for everything?" I pulled out my phone. I had the bank statement screenshot saved in a folder. 8 months of charges and a neat row of proof. I slid my phone across the table. Haley picked it up. Her expression shifted almost immediately. Her thumb moved across the screen, stopped, moved again. When she was done, she handed it to Dante. Dante read through it and his face went from serious to something heavier. He looked up and stared at Wes and said, $9,000. You spent $9,000 of her money on toys. Wes opened his mouth. It wasn't all at once, he said. Like that mattered. Dante set the phone down slowly and said, your wife was wearing scrubs with holes in them. Your wife was skipping meals. Each sentence landed on the table like something solid. Wes opened his mouth again. Nothing came out. Then Haley stood up from the table. She walked to the counter and grabbed her purse. She wasn't finished. Dale's wife hadn't just told her Wes quit. She had seen Wes at the electronics store in June, at the outdoor gear shop in August, living like a man with a full paycheck and zero obligations. Haley pulled out a folded piece of paper. She came straight to me and held it out and said, "Dale's wife gave me this last Sunday. I wasn't sure whether to show you, but now I am." I unfolded it. It was a screenshot from a private fishing group. The post was from July, a picture of a rod and reel, brand new and still shiny, sitting on the tailgate of someone's truck. The caption said something about finally having time to enjoy life. The username was Wes's. I read it twice. My hands went still. July. That was the month I worked 11 days straight because one of the other techs had quit and we were short-staffed. I remembered coming home so exhausted I couldn't even shower before falling asleep, and he had been online posting about enjoying life. I turned and looked at Wes. For the first time all evening, I spoke directly to him. I held up the paper. "You posted about enjoying life. In July, while I was working doubles and eating peanut butter for dinner." Wes shook his head and said I was taking it out of context. I said, "What context makes that acceptable?" He ran his hand over his face and said he had been struggling mentally and needed something for himself. He said it like that was supposed to close the matter. I said, "You needed $9,000 worth of something for yourself while telling me we were broke because of my paycheck?" He didn't answer. There was no way to say that out loud that sounded acceptable, and he knew it. I asked him plainly, "Did you ever apply to a single job?" He said yes immediately, too fast, the way someone answers when the truth isn't behind it. I said, "Show me one email confirmation, one rejection letter. Pull up your phone right now and show me one piece of proof." Wes's hand moved toward his pocket, but he didn't take out his phone. He said, "I deleted them. I let that sit." Then I said, "You deleted 8 months of job applications but kept every delivery receipt." The table went so quiet I could hear the ice settling in someone's glass. Fionn put his head in his hands. Wes saw it. He turned away from me and looked straight at Haley and said, "You always do this. You always side with everyone else. You've always favored Fionn. This whole dinner is about him anyway, isn't it? Golden Child gets the celebration and I get put on trial." The table went completely still. Fionn lifted his head and looked at Wes like he'd just been hit. It was his birthday, and Wes had just made it about himself. He was trying to blow the whole thing apart. If he could shift this into a fight between him and his mom, suddenly nobody was talking about the $9,000 anymore. But this time, he chose the wrong battle in front of the wrong people. Dante stood up slowly. He didn't slam anything. He didn't raise his voice. He just rose from his chair and looked at Wes and said, "Sit down and stop embarrassing yourself. This is not about your brother. This is not about your mother. This is about what you did to your wife. Now answer her question or leave this table." Wes sat down because there was nowhere left to go. The room was silent and I sat there looking at him and realized something. Wes didn't have a defense. He never did. Every single thing he'd said that night was just a way to get people looking somewhere else so they wouldn't look directly at him, and every distraction had now been used up. Haley sat back down. Fionn poured himself a glass of water. His hand wasn't entirely steady. For 8 months I had been alone with this. But right now, I wasn't alone. Haley reached across and put her hand on my arm. Her eyes were red, but she wasn't crying. She said, "I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions months ago." I just nodded. I didn't cry. I'd already cried enough in the shower at 5 in the morning before my shifts and in my car after checking the bank balance. I had used up all my tears on him a long time ago. Wes must have felt something shift in the room because that's when he made his move. He looked at me and his eyes were wet. He let the tears sit there without wiping them away. He wanted me to notice them. He said, "I know I messed up, but I love you. We can fix this. I'll get a job this week. I promise. Just don't make a decision like this when you're this upset." His voice cracked on the word promise, and I'll be honest. For 1 second I felt it. That pull. That deep, familiar pull that comes from 6 years of being with someone. Wes was good at this part. When the walls were closing in, he could find this voice. Soft, broken, convincing. The kind that made you want to believe him so badly it hurt. He reached his hand across the table toward mine. Slow, palm up. He said, "Please, one more chance." And I almost gave in. My fingers actually shifted on the table like my body was about to move before my mind could stop it. And then I remembered. The scrubs with holes at the knees. The lunches I skipped. Standing in the grocery store with a calculator open, making sure I stayed under $40 while Wes was at home ordering $20 delivery every day. The 2 times I tried to talk to him about money, and both times he made me feel small for asking. 8 months of being made to feel like I wasn't doing enough, when the truth was I had been keeping everything above water the entire time. He was the one poking holes in the boat. I pulled my hand back and placed it in my lap before his fingers could reach mine. His hand stopped in the middle of the table. Open. Empty. He stared at it like he genuinely didn't understand why mine wasn't there. Then he looked up at me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just clear. I said, "You didn't mess up. Messing up is forgetting to pay a bill. You lied to me every single day for 8 months. You watched me skip meals and wear clothes with holes in them. And you spent $9,000 making sure you stayed comfortable while I did it. That's not messing up. That's a choice you made over and over and over again." Wes closed his hand slowly into a fist and pulled it back to his side. I stood up from the table. I didn't shove my chair back. I didn't make a scene. I just stood up the way you stand when you're completely done. Wes's head snapped toward me and he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going home to get the rest of my things." The word rest caught up to him a moment later. He said, "What do you mean the rest of your things?" I said, "I've been packing all week, Wes. 1 bag at a time. While you were sleeping until noon and gaming all afternoon. You never noticed because you never pay attention to anything that doesn't directly benefit you." That landed. Wes stood up so fast his chair tipped back on 2 legs. "You can't just leave." I said, "I can and I am." He said, "You're making this into something bigger than it has to be." Dante looked up and said, "She's not overreacting. You lost the right to say that back in March." I turned toward the door and that's when Haley caught up to me. She said quietly, "You are doing the right thing, and if you need anything, you call me, not him, me." When I decided to let this come out at dinner, part of me expected Haley to make excuses for her son. Instead, his own mother was standing at the door choosing what was right over what was easy. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say anything back. I stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind me. As I walked to my car, I could hear Wes's voice through the door, muffled but loud enough to pick up the tone. He was yelling not at me, at them, blaming everyone in the room, turning himself into the victim of the very people he had just tried to manipulate. I sat down behind the wheel and stayed there a moment. For the first time in 8 months, the weight on my chest felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. I turned the key and backed out of the driveway. I didn't look back at the house. The apartment was dark when I walked in. The glow from Wes's gaming setup in the corner lit up half the room, that blue and purple light coming off the tower he bought in April with money I earned standing on my feet for 10 hours at a stretch. The new headphones sat on the desk. He wore those every night while I was in the other room going over bills, figuring out which ones I could push to the next pay period. By the front door were his sneakers, all 3 pairs, lined up neatly against the wall like they were on display. He took better care of those shoes than he ever took care of me. I walked straight to the bedroom closet and grabbed the last 2 bags. They were tucked behind the hanging clothes on his side because I knew he'd never look there. He hadn't touched that side of the closet in months. I set the bags by the door, and that's when I noticed it. On the nightstand, right next to where he charged his phone, a receipt, a new controller, bought yesterday. While I was working a 12-hour shift, he had gone out and bought himself a brand new controller, even after I faked the letter about my hours being reduced. Even after every comfort in his life had been quietly disappearing one by one, this man had still found a way to spend money on himself. I folded the receipt and put it in my pocket. I grabbed my bags and carried them to the front door, and that's when my phone buzzed. It was Haley. He just left the house, she said. Dante told him he needs a job by the end of the week or they won't be helping him with anything. Fionn won't even look at him. Are you safe? I told her I was at the apartment but leaving in 2 minutes. She said, good. Then she paused. One more thing. I went through some old messages after you left. Wes asked Dante for money twice this summer. Said it was for groceries. Dante gave him $400 both times. She paused again. That money never went to groceries, did it? I stood in the doorway, phone in one hand and a bag in the other, and said, no, it did not. $800. His own father had given him $800 because Wes said it was for food. She told me to stay safe and to reach out if I needed anything. I hung up and carried my bags out to the car and placed them in the trunk next to the other 2 I'd already loaded before dinner. 4 bags. That was my entire life packed up in the back of my car. I went inside one last time. I sat down at the dining table where I had sat so many nights with a calculator open trying to plan meals for the week on less than $40, and I pulled a sheet from the notepad we kept by the fridge. I wrote, I covered rent through the end of the month. After that, it's yours. The bank account is separated. Your name is on the lease. Everything you bought with my money is still here. Enjoy it. You earned it. I folded it in half and set it on the counter right next to the coffee maker. That was the first place Wes went every morning. That coffee maker was also the first place I used to go, except I went at 5:30 inches the morning, before driving to the clinic to start another shift that paid for everything in that apartment. I pulled the door shut behind me and heard the lock click. Then my phone buzzed. It was Wes. We need to talk. You're blowing this out of proportion. Just come home and we can work this out. 8 months of lies. $9,000. A fake layoff. His wife going hungry and wearing clothes with holes. And I was blowing it out of proportion. I didn't respond. I took a screenshot and saved it to the same folder where I kept the bank statements and the phishing post. Then I blocked his number. The screen went quiet. I started driving to my coworker's place. On the way, I called my manager at the clinic. She picked up on the second ring and I told her I didn't need that fake letter anymore. She laughed and said, did it work? I said, better than I expected. She said my full schedule was there whenever I was ready. I pulled into my coworker's driveway about 15 minutes later and turned off the engine. The house was dark except for the porch light she'd left on for me. The car was still. My phone was still. Nobody was asking anything of me. Nobody was lying to my face. Nobody was placing delivery orders on my card while I was eating peanut butter at work. The only person who would have been calling was blocked and probably standing in an empty apartment next to a coffee maker, reading a note, realizing the safety net he had been standing on for 8 months was no longer there. I sat in the quiet and thought about the version of me from 8 months ago. The one who stood at the front door in March and hugged Wes when he said he got laid off. The one who said we'd be fine and truly meant it. The one who picked up extra shifts the very next day without being asked. The one who believed him because it never once crossed her mind that the person she loved most would look her in the eye and lie, and watch her fall apart, and choose every single day to let it keep going. I felt sorry for her. Not in a weak way. In the way you feel sorry for someone who gave absolutely everything to someone who never deserved any of it. She carried it all. The bills, the stress, the doubt, the empty fridge, the holes in her clothes, the $7 lunches she skipped, the $40 grocery trip she counted down to the last penny. She carried all of it for 8 months and never once set it down because she believed that was what love was supposed to look like. I got out of the car and walked around to the trunk and grabbed my bags, all 4 of them. I stood there in the driveway, breathing easy for the first time since March. That version of me carried everything. This version was only carrying what was hers.